What's up guys, Tommy Bowyer here from Movie Rewind, and today I'm going to be counting down the top 10 episodes of the Batman animated series. So without further ado, let's get into it. I grew up during the early 2000s, and unlike a lot of people, Batman the animated series from the 90s was not the Batman show which I hold close to my heart. Instead, I grew up with The Batman. It was an animated show which ran from 2004 to 2008, in which they reimagined the character of the Batman to kind of separate him from the animated series Batman portrayed by Kevin Conroy, who had dominated the 90s. For me, The Batman is a Batman show which is severely underrated. I'm seeing recently there's quite a lot of renewed appreciation for the show, but at the time I remember a lot of people were writing it off, saying it's not as good as the 90s Batman, so it's a poor follow-up to that. But actually, I think that it's a very strong Batman series. So I thought today I would count down my personal top 10 favourite episodes from this series. Now, a few disclaimers before we start. Firstly, this is my opinion. You know, we're all biased, as am I. This is a TV show which I grew up with as a kid, so obviously I'm going to be biased. Secondly, this is going to contain spoilers, so please keep that in mind. If you haven't seen this series, I would suggest watching it before you watch this video. And thirdly, please feel free to comment down below what your favourite episodes are, as I love hearing you guys' opinions as well. So anyway, let's get on with this video. To start off this list, I've chosen Fire and Ice, a Series 2 episode which sees Batman have to take down Mr. Freeze, who's teamed up with Firefly in order to freeze Gotham so that they can mass rob the people and citizens of Gotham City. Now for me, Fire and Ice is an episode of the Batman which just really sums up the show. It's darker, it's fun, it's action-packed, and the villains are definitely the standout. Now, I love this interpretation of Mr. Freeze. He's a less emotional character and a more villainous character, which I think works as a kind of unique interpretation of the character. I think he teams up with Firefly quite well. They're two characters who you wouldn't exactly see teaming up together, but I like all the bickering between them. I think that works great. And I think how the Batman is able to resolve the problem by getting them to turn on each other is a great thing. I especially like the Batman when he's up against Mr. Freeze, because you can tell there is so much hatred and resentment between both of them that this episode, it just has everything that I'd want to see in a battle between the Batman and Mr. Freeze. And you got Firefly there as well, which just adds to it. Plus, there is a great scene at the end of this episode where the Batman gets appreciation from Gotham City Police for the very first time. We see half after he has saved the police from being frozen to death, they all clap for him. And that's the first time that this incarnation of the Batman has actually been respected by the police. So this episode, it's a fun episode, but it's also an important episode because it shows that the Batman is starting to achieve the appreciation of Gotham City Police. Next, I've chosen A Matter of Family, the series opener for Series 4, and I have to say, this is an episode which is on this ranking not only because it's a great introduction to the boy wonder Robin, but it also has some great voice acting cameos. We have Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill voicing characters in this episode, and that's a lovely touch. You know, two icons in the Batman universe returning to this version of the Batman to provide voices, and I think that's great, especially Mark Hamill. He brings to life Tony Zuko, the man who is responsible for the death of Dick Grayson's parents, and he does bring a very chilling tone to this character. Even though he only appears in one episode, Zuko is definitely a villain from the Batman, which you will remember. I also think Robin's introduction is handled very well, with the death of his parents being caused by Zuko and him finding out that Bruce Wayne is the Batman. It's all handled very well, it's paced well, it's not rushed, and by the end of the episode, Robin really does feel like the sidekick to the Batman. So I think that A Matter of Family, it's a great Robin origin story, which also has some great cameo appearances from Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill. Next, we have JTV. Now, for me, Kevin Michael Richardson's portrayal of the Joker is very underrated. I think it's a great interpretation of the character, and there are a lot of Joker-centred episodes in this series. But for me, JTV from Series 2 is one which stands out, and I think that's for three reasons. Firstly, the Joker is so much fun in it. The idea that the Joker is taking control of Gotham's TVs to kind of promote his own weird show, I think is so very Joker. I think it just works. This guy loves attention. He wants to be a showman, and JTV is an episode which shows that. Secondly, there are so many references to 60s Batman, you know, from the bam, whap and whack which appear when he's fighting Punch and Judy, to the Joker saying, find out, same Joker crime, same Joker channel. I think that's just brilliant. References to 60s Batman. I'm never going to have a problem with that. And thirdly, the appearance of Cash Tankinson, portrayed by Patrick Warburton. Oh my God, this character is hilarious. He is so bad at being a detective, but he's so up himself, thinking he's some kind of superhero, the best detective in the world. And I just think it's brilliant, especially when you got an actor like Patrick Warburton voicing him. Warburton's very good at portraying these very larger than life characters, and Cash Tankerson is perfect for him to voice. So for me, JTV, much like Fire and Ice, it's a fun episode. It's a fun episode which sees the Batman fighting his arch nemesis in Joker. Next, I've chosen Ragdoll To Riches. Once again, going for a Series 2 episode. I think that's because Series 2 was, for me, peak the Batman, in my personal opinion. But Ragdoll To Riches, you have the Batman having to try and catch a new criminal known as Ragdoll, who is a very fun villain, I have to admit. He's one of those villains where, a lot like Joker, he's just a load of fun to see on screen, and the fact that he's so flexible and kind of distort his body into weird positions, I find that very creepy, especially when he's out of his costume. We also see Catwoman in this episode, and I have to say I really like episodes with Catwoman in the Batman, because I just really like her chemistry with Batman. I think it works very well. But you also have the mirror image, because you have Bruce Wayne getting to know Selina Kyle. And it's interesting because Selina Kyle isn't very attracted to Bruce Wayne. You know, she's just using him to try and see if he's got anything worth nicking. But as Catwoman, she adores the Batman. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic throughout this episode. Plus you have Ragdoll there to try and cause problems between them. There's this great fight scene in the final act of this episode, a three-way fight between the Batman, Catwoman and Ragdoll, which I think is really great. And I also love the ending of this episode, when Bruce Wayne actually gives Selina Kyle the money which she's been looking for, and yet she doesn't steal it. She donates it to an animal welfare centre. And I think that's really interesting. It adds a lot of depth to this incarnation of Catwoman. I think it was the perfect end to a very fun episode. Next we have Breakout, a Series 4 episode. And I like this episode because it focuses on Robin and Batgirl. For the majority of this episode, the Batman is actually being held hostage, and Robin and Batgirl have to try and save the day. We have Black Mask in this episode. And, you know, I remember watching Birds of Prey, and everyone was saying that Ewan McGregor's portrayal of Black Mask was really good. And I was like, no, go and watch this episode, because that is who Black Mask is supposed to be. He's not just a petty thug. You know, he's not a supervillain. He is a criminal. He's a crime boss. You know, his organisation is vast. And one of the most brutal things he does is when he eventually does get out of the police station after being held hostage by Robin and Batgirl, the guy who gets him out, his number one, gets punished because, as Black Mask says, you didn't get me out quick enough. And I think that is brutal. You know, that really does show how much power Black Mask has as a villain. I think this episode stands out for me because Batgirl and Robin have to actually take the lead, and I love the conversation they have halfway through this episode where Robin asks Batgirl, you know, do you ever get scared? And I think it kind of hit home that for half the time they're joking around, they think it's fun, but actually they are putting themselves at risk. You know, these villains will kill them given half a chance. So I think that Breakout is just one of those episodes which focuses on the younger members of the Batman team, and I think it works very well. Next, I've chosen the finale of Series 1, the rubber face of comedy and the clay face of tragedy. Now, this two-parter is very emotional, and it also sets up the Batman's best villain, and that is Clayface. Ethan Bennett and this series' interpretation of the Clayface character has to be one of its strongest elements. The idea that Clayface is actually this very tragic character, and this two-parter sets him up very well. The rubber face of comedy is your classic Joker episode, which once again, it works, you know, it's fun, it's exciting. Joker is obviously the standout, but obviously we also get Joker torturing Ethan Bennett, the detective who is also close friends with Bruce Wayne, and he breaks him. He breaks his mind and also transforms him into Clayface. And then we have the follow-up episode, The Clayface of Tragedy, which follows Clayface as he tries to get his revenge on his boss, who he blames for his deformity. And I think that it's a really tragic tale. You know, this is a man who at the end of the day was a good man. You know, he was a police detective, he was trying his best, but he was just pushed to breaking point by Joker. And I think that's why this episode stands out to me, and it was a great way to end the first series, because Clayface is not a villain, you know. If anything, he is just someone who had one rotten day, as the Joker said, and he became a monster. So this episode is one of the more emotional ones in the Batman series, and it introduces us to a great interpretation of Clayface. Next we have Gotham's Ultimate Criminal Mastermind, the finale for Series 3. This is an episode which is once again very unique. We see Hugo Strange unleash this villain known as Dave, who is basically a combination of all the minds of Batman's villains, ranging from Joker, Penguin, Mr. Freeze, Riddler, and this Dave quickly finds out Batman's true identity and plans to release it to the public. And I think this is a great episode because this is an episode where the Batman, he can't actually do anything. Dave knows all of his villains' tricks and he is able to break Batman very easily. And I think it's great that Hugo Strange is the one who releases him. This is the episode where Batman kind of realises how psychotic Strange is and how he really belongs in a cell in Arkham rather than being a psychologist. So it's a great pivotal episode for that particular storyline. And I also think it's great how the Batman is able to defeat Dave in the end, saying, you know, well, every villain has an origin story. What's yours? And that melts his mind because Dave doesn't have an origin story. You know, he weren't created into being a villain. You know, he is just an amalgam of loads of different villains. So I love that that is how Dave is broken. So it's the Batman's intellect which wins him out of that fight. It's not his strength. So I really like this episode. I think it was the perfect episode to end Series 3 with, and it was great to see Hugo Strange locked up by the end of this episode because he was a villain who was really operating under the radar throughout Series 2 and Series 3, so it was great for him to get his comeuppance by the end. In third place, I've chosen Artefacts from Series 4. Now for me, this is the Batman's interpretation of the Dark Knight Returns story because we see archaeologists in the far future finding the Batcave, and it's in ruins, and there's all these legends about who the Batman was and who Robin and Batgirl were, and we see them trying to figure out how to defeat Mr. Freeze, who has returned after many decades away and is now taking Gotham City hostage. So they're trying to figure out if by looking through the Batcave they can kind of see how the Batman would have defeated him. But we also get flashbacks to when the Batman was older, when he last battled Mr. Freeze, and I think they're really interesting scenes because the Batman is now much older, Robin is now Nightwing, but Mr. Freeze is still very much in his prime. And as I said earlier on in this video, this interpretation of Mr. Freeze, a more villainous version, I think is very interesting and unique. So this episode really does stand out for me. I like how even beyond the grave, Batman is still protecting the residents of Gotham City. That just shows how dedicated the Batman was to justice and defeating these villains. So Artefacts is one of those episodes which is unique. You know, it stands out. I like how it focuses on an older Batman as he battles Mr. Freeze, a Batman who doesn't necessarily have the strength and speed that he used to, but is still very much a hero, and I think this episode is very good at that. In second place, I've chosen another Series 2 episode, and that is Riddled. Now, this episode, of course, introduces the Riddler to this series, And I have to say, it is handled very well. I like how the riddles are not over the top like the 60s TV show. Instead, they're riddles which you could try and solve yourself. I also think it's great how the Riddler knows that Batman is behind it all, but he still lets Detective Yin kind of take credit. He's one for playing games with people. And I also think it's fascinating how the Riddler's mind games were actually supposed to get the police further away from the truth. While they're out solving all these riddles, he's back at the original location, actually carrying out the crime he intends to. So I think that's a really interesting idea. It kind of shows how smart the Riddler is. And this interpretation of the Riddler, in terms of his physical design, it's hit or miss. You know, it's okay. It's an alright character design, but I wouldn't say it's iconic. But in terms of an episode which focuses on the Riddler, I think Riddled has it all. It has puzzles, it has a lot of detective work that the Batman has to do, and I think that the Riddler is a decent villain in this episode. And for me, the best episode of the Batman is Meltdown from Series 2. Now this is basically a follow-up to where the Series 1 finale left off, because we see Clayface is captured and Batman tries to get him to assimilate back into society as Ethan Bennett. And this is once again a very tragic tale, because Ethan tries his best, but people won't accept him. All people see is a monster. And by the end of this episode, Ethan decides that actually being Ethan Bennett is very hard, whereas being Clayface, this monster who everyone hates, is really easy. So he decides to turn to a life of crime as Clayface. And it's a very tragic ending. You know, it is a very tragic ending. I think this episode works best because it focuses so much on Ethan's character, kind of showing how he is pushed to this point. We also get a great cameo from Joker in this episode as well, who once again kind of pushes him over the edge and kind of manipulates him into saying, well, actually being a villain is a lot more fun than being a hero. So I think this episode has it all. You know, once again, as I said, Clayface is the best villain out of this series of Batman. So I think Meltdown is going to be the best episode of the series for me, because I just love what it does to this character. How Clayface isn't just an out-and-out villain. It's a tragic tale of one man's descent into madness. So thanks for watching, guys. I really do hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe in order to receive great and maybe even improved quality content in the future. And I will see you in another one. See ya!